I seem to always find myself in nature during the pivotal crossroads of my life. Nature engages all my senses and shakes me awake from the lethargy of doing. It makes me feel alive. Nature asks me to listen, to wait for answers. I found I'm not a bad listener, but I truly suck at waiting. And I've also found that I desperately need times of solitude. For me, it's in the outdoors like this. For you, it may be another place. Well, wherever that place is, we need times without television, computer, cell phone, people, all the stuff that occupies us, that consumes us. It's hard to hear, to wait, and to see without escaping the frenetic kaleidoscope of our doing. Thoreau says it well. It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. For me, it's hard to see much indoors. There are walls that make me seem small. Solitude in nature forces me to wait. And in the waiting, my empty, withered soul is enlarged. I don't quite understand what enlarges me, but in solitude for me, in nature, the longer I wait, the more I tend to listen. And the larger I become inside, and the more alive I feel. Why is it so hard for us to take advantage of times of solitude, wherever we best find it, when it's absolutely one of the most life-giving things we can do? Only a few other times in my life equal the moments I've had in this spiritual retreat, this sanctuary teeming with life, with color, and with sound. Listen. Listen. Right now, can you hear the river, the birds? It's the sounds of solitude. It's a cool, crisp autumn morning. Solitude. What more do I need? A scenic river, a familiar trail. I know what's down the path, and I'm still excited to be here again. This out-of-the-way place has been a refuge of healing for me, a place of retreat from the shame and judgment of man, and a place of acceptance for who I am. It's a secluded, virtually unknown Garden of Eden. Once in a place of solitude, we need to ask questions of ourselves, of God, and then we need to wait, to see, to listen. Why do I have such a hard time being? What has caused me to be afraid of being alone with myself? Well, Henry Nouwen says this: somewhere we know that without silence, words lose their meaning, that without listening, speaking no longer heals, that without distance, closeness cannot cure. Now, wherever you are, I want you to write down a single phrase to keep in front of you during this time. So what one phrase would you use in reply to this question? Hi, I'm Randy. Nice to meet you. What do you do? Well, write that down. Now, I want you to write down a second phrase. What would you use in reply to this question? Hi, I'm Randy. Nice to meet you. Who are you? Who are you? Write it down and keep it close. Contrary to popular opinion, I think the goal of life is not doing what you love, it's being who you are. Our time on earth is limited. On average, we live about 27,000 days. 27,000 days. The first 9,000 or so, we grow up and we get an education. And the next 9,000 days, we work hard to establish a home, a family, and a career. And then we blink and the next 9,000 days are suddenly here. And we plan to, well, you fill in the words. Retire to play golf in Florida, keep doing what you've been doing, get a travel trailer, have a midlife crisis, or do we dare to really live out our last 9,000 days, being who we are and making our dreams come true? Do we dare ask the existential question, to search for meaning in life, to reach for our dreams? Some of us are still in the first 9,000 days of our life, and others in the middle of the frantic busyness of the second 9,000. But even in our first 18,000 days, do we really want to spend them doing something we hate or even something we love at the expense of being who we really are? Life is too short. It's easy to get trapped into living with the results of other people's thinking or the influences of the institutions of life, our family, church, school, and society. Well, listen carefully to the words of the immortal Steve Jobs. Don't let the noise of other opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. I opened my book, Ruminations, very purposefully with a quote from the great theologian Jim Carrey. Why fail at something you don't enjoy? At least fail at something you love. It is a powerful and thought-provoking quote. However, I would like to dare qualify that last sentence to say this: at least fail at doing what you are. Be who you are, not what you do. Be who you are, not what you do. How? Well, first, by asking the right questions. Most of us have not been allowed to ask questions, to question things. History has subjected us to an awful lot of know-it-alls, men, almost always men, who know what is best for everyone, who can articulate exactly what we all must think, believe, do, and avoid. I'm increasingly suspicious of those who have all the answers and who will not tolerate questions. I think there is a difference between good questions and the right questions. Asking good questions can free us from the lies of control. A few of my good questions during my first 18,000 days were, well, do I have to stay in the isolation and the poverty of the mountains in which I grew up? Do I have to work in the coal mines and not finish high school like everyone else in my family? Another question, should my job come before my family? Another, is all truth God's truth? Is the Bible literal? Is it true? And then about 8 years ago, I asked, is this all there is to life? Constant meetings and religious politics that have nothing to do with who I am. These questions were good questions, and they eventually led to freedom from a 30-year career that had withered my soul. Once I managed the courage to be free, however, I suddenly found that my newfound freedom became a prison. I'd never been allowed to spread my wings, and so I crashed. But the crash, the suffering, led to a desperation that caused me to start asking the right questions. And asking the right questions can lead us to meaning. Could it be that it's the questions, not the answers, that give freedom and meaning? Good questions lead to freedom. The right questions lead to meaning. So you may ask, and rightly so, how can we know the right questions? Well, I believe that the right questions are universal, questions that have been asked throughout history. And men like Donald Brown, Joseph Campbell, and James Hollis have spent their life researching these universal questions, questions that are as old as time. These three men have identified recurring questions throughout history. Brown calls them the human universals. Campbell calls it the hero's journey, and Hollis calls them the swamplands of the soul. I have researched these men's writings and many others, and I've identified common questions in their studies. This led me to spending hundreds of hours creating a new resource, God, I Have a Question or Two, to help identify universal questions that recur in all societies throughout history. Questions to ask yourself, to ask others, and to ask God. If we can manage the courage and endure the suffering to begin this quest for meaning, we will find the goal of life is not happiness or success or even doing what you love. The goal of life is meaning. It's ironic that many of these questions come out only later in life after intense suffering and expensive psychotherapy. It takes wise and experienced guides to help us break the chains of institutional lies. The deceptions we've been told as truth by those we trust can be dangerous and volatile, especially if they are spoken by those we have been taught to give unquestioning respect: our teachers, our preachers, our culture, and yes, even our family. They don't intend to mislead us, but they do. Indeed, they've been misled as well. It's an endless tangle of rusty chains that hold us back from who we really are. And so, we must break the chains of the past. We underestimate the power of the institutions of our lives to restrict us. These chains confine us to the past. They contaminate the present, and they consume our future. When well-meaning people tell us to cut the apron strings, well, we know all too well these are not mere strings. They're an endless tangle of thick, rusty chains. We are prisoners of our own history. Well, who can forget the first view of the pod in the iconic movie The Matrix? I will never forget the chill that settled over me as I saw those thousands and thousands of grown people imprisoned in pods, covered in embryonic fluid and attached to the umbilical cords of masters they never wanted. So here are 4 chains that need to be broken. First, we need to break the chains of family. Pat Conroy published The Great Santini in 1976, and it was later made into a film starring Robert Duvall. Conroy starred his father in his novel memoir and gave the rest of his family supporting roles. According to Pat, his father, whom he had immortalized as the tyrannical Colonel Bull Meacham, called him after reading each chapter to ask in a choked voice why he hated him so much. Pat's mother, Peg, was horrified and stopped speaking to him altogether. In person, Pat Conroy is like your best pal, but he somehow found the guts and wrote candidly about himself and his family. His relatives shunned him, and his mom's devoutly Christian relatives handed out pamphlets at his book signings, urging customers not to buy The Great Santini. They wanted nothing more to do with him. His mom divorced her husband of 33 years in the aftermath, and Pat himself went into therapy soon after the book appeared. On balance, he said the whole Conroy clan reacted to his novel about them by having a collective nervous breakdown. However, as Conroy tenderly recounts years later, even the oldest of wounds can heal. In the final years of his life, father and son reached a friendship of sorts. Quite unexpectedly, the great Santini began to target his ire on those who had turned on his son over the years. He defended his son's honor. Pat's ultimate conclusion is that love can soften even the meanest of men, giving meaning to one of the most oft-quoted lines from his best-selling novel, The Prince of Tides. In families, there are no crimes that cannot be forgiven. Second, we need to break the chains of religion. I wrestled with the decision to include this story, but felt compelled to recount this very real and present example of the chains of religion. As I always say before every talk, the important thing is not that you agree with everything I say, but that you think. We Americans suck at thinking, at open and honest dialogue. Well, a few years ago, I was asked by EMI Records to do a television interview of a young lady named Vicki Beeching. As a matter of fact, That interview has the distinction of being my most viewed YouTube video of all time. At that time, Vicki was a relatively unknown recording artist and songwriter who had just signed her first record deal with Worship Together, which is EMI's Christian imprint. At the outset, I was struck not only by her extraordinary physical beauty, but also by her engaging charisma and warm kindness. An Oxford graduate with a degree in theology, she possessed an all too rare chemistry that comes from a vast intellect, a deep humility, and a delightful English accent, inflected with the muse of Chaucer's Canterbury. We became good friends, and she asked me to mentor her in social media. As her career progressed, her layered and beautiful songwriting has earned the majority of her income. In 2009, she was diagnosed with morphia, an autoimmune disease brought on by inner stress, and returned to the UK to receive 18 months of chemotherapy. The treatment was successful, but the life-threatening illness forced her to evaluate her life. And by a series of events, she was hired by the BBC and is now a sought-after commentator on issues related to ethics, technology, women, Christianity, music, and social media. She's also finishing a PhD with Christianity and sexuality as her main focus. In August 2014, this theologian who spends holy days with the Archbishop of Canterbury, whose God-fearing lyrics are sung by millions in America's Bible Belt, came out as a lesbian. And she has been crucified by religion. Boycotts of her music were already in place since Vicki decided to speak up for same-sex marriage over a year ago, and has taken much away from her ongoing income. Hatred has been flung at her online ever since by religious people. Quotes like, "You are possessed by the devil," is a typical comment. I personally watched a chilling, shame-filled video by a religious leader about her coming out a few weeks ago. But in her words, what Jesus taught was a radical message of welcome and inclusion and love. I feel certain God loves me just the way I am. She says, when I think of myself at age 16, sobbing into the carpet of that old church as they tried to exorcise my attraction towards women, I just want to help anyone in that situation to not have to go through what I did, to show that instead you can be yourself, a person of integrity. Well, regardless of how you feel about homosexuality and Vicki's decision, most of us, if not all, carry chains of religious dogma that hinder and shame us from asking ourselves and God honest, searching, and candid questions. In my own memoir, A Renaissance Redneck in a Megachurch Pulpit, I write that religious ideas are curious things. They flow in ruts worn deep by time and habit. And the rare men and women who have the character to propose to divert them by reason and argument have a long contract on their hands. Religion, as I know it and Vicki knows it, is a way of life where no is said with such constancy that on some days one might forget that the affirmative is even a possibility. The question of restrictions, of what is allowed and not allowed, is very much at the heart of the story of fundamentalism. It is a parable about the nature of control. But what if the Garden of Eden was not a story of shame at all? What if it was a story of getting it right by getting it wrong? What if it were truly a story of being who God created us to be? So third, we need to break the chains of education. Sir Ken Robinson, in his amazing TED Talk, How Schools Kill Creativity, says this: we have a system of education that is modeled on the industrial age. Schools are still organized like factories, ringing bells, separate facilities, specialized into separate subjects, and the idea of one answer. We still educate children by batches. We need to give our children the ability to see lots of possible answers to a question, to think divergently, to think not just in linear or convergent ways, and to see multiple answers, not just one. Walt Disney hated high school so much that he sent a letter to his principal telling him how disgusted he was by it. Starting to dabble in the entertainment industry by age 14, Walt and his friend Russell put a down payment on a movie camera and intended to begin making children's films. Frustrated with school, Walt decided to set his own course and pursue work as an artist, in particular as a newspaper cartoonist. His father was aghast at the impracticality of this plan. He fully intended for Walt to work at his jelly company, but in Walt's words, I was able to line up right on an objective, and I went for it. By age 17, Disney had his dream and was ready to make it come true. And the rest, as they say, is history. Walt Disney's dream did come true, far beyond even his wildest imaginations. And by having the courage to be and do who he truly was, he has helped us all wish upon a star. Well, fourth, we need to break the chains of society. Consider the immortal words of Nelson Mandela, who grew up in and defied the racist society of South Africa. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. Well, we previously heard the words of Steve Jobs as he said to have the courage to follow our heart and intuition, but we're afraid. We're afraid we'll look ridiculous. We're afraid to try. We are afraid we may fail. What if the only courage you need is the courage to be who you really are? Wouldn't you do everything you could to seek out that courage? Breaking these chains and finding your passion takes courage. That's why you need encouragement, especially if you don't see results as quickly as you would like. That kind of courage comes best from encouragers, from wise guides. And so it behooves us to seek them out. They are a rare breed and they're hard to find, but the effort will provide unexpected gifts. In order to be who we are, we must seek wise guides. Good guides tell us they see something ahead. Better guides give us a detailed running account of what they see ahead, but wise guides help us see for ourselves. Well, some traits to look for in wise guides. Wise guides are encouragers. Wise guides have wrestled with their inner being. They question their actions and their reactions. They have an internalized consciousness. Wise guides embrace good questions and lead us to the right ones. Wise guides always have wise guides to lead and encourage them. Well, seek guides who are not afraid of the right questions. We all need someone to help us press inward, not repress our deepest hurts, joys, and feelings. We need someone who can help us recognize and have the courage to touch the hot ovens of our hurts, the chains that bind us. That is why the best therapists stop us and ask the question, well, now what are you feeling there? When a tear or deep emotion is touched. We do not have the determination, or many times, the objectivity or the ability to do it alone. I've given the remainder of my life to be a wise guide. I don't want the suffering and the valuable guides in my life to be wasted. That is why I'm doing who I am. I'm gathering people that recreate, request, rewrite. I'm creating resources that encourage and mentoring and coaching people in one-on-ones. It's who I am. After way too many years of unfulfilling work, Bronnie Ware began searching for a job with meaning. Despite having no formal qualifications or experience, she found herself working in hospice care. During the years spent tending to the needs of those who were dying, Bronnie's life was transformed. In her book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, she expresses in a heartfelt retelling how significant these regrets are and how we can address these issues while we still have time. Ware writes of the phenomenal clarity of vision that people gain at the end of their lives and how we might learn from their wisdom. When questioned about any regrets they had for anything they would do differently, Ware says, common themes surfaced again and again. According to Ware, here is the top regret of the dying. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. She writes, that was the most common regret of all. When people realize that their life is almost over and they look back clearly on it, they see how many dreams went unfulfilled. Most people had not honored even half their dreams and had to die knowing that it was due to choices they had made or not made. Health and success bring a numbing to our life that we don't realize until we no longer have it. Soon after the horror of 9/11, I embarked on a trip to a Muslim country in Central Asia called Kyrgyzstan. I had never heard of it. I did not like to fly, and I'm a homebody, but for some reason I went. As our group cleared security at Heathrow in London for the second leg of our journey, there was a delay because even the seasoned British Guard had never seen the FRU airport code for Bishkek, the capital city of Kyrgyzstan. Let's just say it is not a well-known mecca of tourism. Well, after 28 hours of grueling travel, we finally arrived at Karakol, a village nestled in the mighty Tian Shan mountain range. I was literally in the middle of nowhere. If you put a finger on the opposite side of the world from Nashville, it would be right around Kyrgyzstan. It was in the middle of this deep fatigue and fear of an alien Muslim world that I experienced a moment of transcendence. My assignment during the trip was to present a lecture to young Muslim college students about art and free enterprise. It was easy to see that all the art in this third world country was utilitarian. There were crude pictures of their homes, called yurts, simple paintings of rugs with the Kyrgyz symbol, and crude sketches of the mountains. There was no concept of creating art simply for art's sake. And for the first time in the history of their country, these Muslim students have been given the freedom to be artists. As my words of encouragement channeled through a Kyrgyz interpreter, you could have heard a pin drop. The Muslim college classroom was far more primitive than the one-room schoolhouses of my Appalachian heritage. The desks were far too small for the students, and the concrete room was freezing cold. Looking out the smoky and broken panes of glass, I could see rivers of human excrement running down the streets. There are still moments when I'll catch a similar smell and I'm instantly transported back to that very moment. I had never witnessed poverty at this level. Even in the Appalachians where I grew up, the eyes of the older people were filled with hopelessness. Most were bleary from the effects of cheap Russian vodka. But the students, huddled in this dingy classroom, had a glimmer of hope in their eyes as I talked about the beauty and the uniqueness of their flora and fauna and the architectural grandeur of the multicolored Russian Orthodox cathedral in the center of their town, their faces filled with pride. And hope. I had landed in a country the world had forgotten, and if that wasn't enough, I had driven 8 hours farther into the middle of nothingness, surrounded by a seemingly impenetrable mountain range. I was shivering from the frigid cold, snowflakes flying, walking through streets paved with mud. The mud streets were lined with drab and depressing gray utilitarian communist-era buildings that were disintegrating. But I was tingling with life. I felt alive. I was scared, alone, and conspicuously American in a village that is now off limits because of the strong Al-Qaeda presence. But I was alive. Why? I had somehow provided encouragement in the middle of despair. If I could encourage the youth in this town, I was convinced it could work anywhere on earth. I didn't want to go back to constant meetings that had nothing to do with me, to worship wars and religious politics. I had found my reason for being, the life I needed to live. 8 years ago, if you had asked me the questions I asked you at the beginning of this talk, the two phrases I would have written down were completely different. What I did was not who I was. Now look at your words. Honestly, look at them. Are they different? So what questions do you need to ask? What chains do you need to break? And what guides do you need to seek? I'm here as living proof that you can be who you are, not what you do. And far greater examples than I, so are Steve Jobs, Pat Conroy, Vicki Beeching, Bronnie Ware, Walt Disney, and Nelson Mandela, to name just a few. Is it easy? No. Is it risky? Yes. Is it scary? Yes. Is there possibility of failure? Yes. But is it possible to make a living being who I am? Yes. Is it life-changing? Yes. Is it life-giving? A resounding yes. Listen to the words of Walt Disney. The more you like yourself, the less you are like anyone else. And that makes you unique. All the adversity I've had in my life, all my troubles and obstacles have strengthened me. You may not realize it when it happens, but a kick in the teeth may be the best thing in the world for you. He says, we did Disneyland in the knowledge that most of the people I talked to thought it would be a financial disaster, closed and forgotten within the first year. But you reach a point where you don't work for money. All your dreams can come true if you have the courage to pursue them. Be who you are.